Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now I'm sure most of you by now have heard of Nvidia's Fermi architecture, which basically kick-started in 2010 with the release of the GTX 480, 470 and 465, priced at 499, 349 and 279 respectively, with the 465 being the most budget orientated card, sitting between the 5850 and 5830 from AMD in terms of performance. Now, despite the higher number, the GTX 460, which came later on, was actually a little more powerful than the 465, but the 465 can be found pretty cheaply along with other Fermi cards, which means that they are still worth buying if you're looking for a cheap gaming solution that supports the latest DX11 and DX12 APIs. Now, on their own, they are nowhere near as powerful as they were once perceived as, but what about in SLI? That's right, because the prices are so low on these cards, you should have no trouble picking up a couple of old Fermi cards based on the old GF100 architecture for less than $50. Now, places like CEX, both in the UK and US, have great prices on such cards, and thanks to a pretty awesome guy by the name of Brian over on Twitter, we will be exploring the performance of the GTX 465s in SLI today and seeing whether or not it's worth purchasing a pair of them for a budget-orientated PC build in 2017. Spec-wise, the GTX 465 features 352 CUDA cores, a graphics clock of 607 MHz and a processor clock of 1215. The cards were available with 1 GB of memory and required a 550 watt PSU according to Nvidia's recommendation, along with 2 6-pin connections. They also ran, as I mentioned before, pretty hot and pretty loud, but without further ado, let's get into some gameplay figures. So let's take a look at how these cards in SLI performed. The gameplay here is not representative of the on-screen results that follow, and I'll be talking you through how each title did individually. First up, it's The Witcher 3, a game that is pretty demanding to run, even on the latest hardware, with the most modern architecture. With the 465s, the game achieved 46 frames per second on average, with a 1% low of 26 and a 0.1% low of 15. This result was based on 1080p resolution and gameplay, including a walk through Novigrad combined with some monster hunting. Not bad, so how do the other results compare? Overwatch, which defaulted to low, achieved a very respectable average of 142, followed by a 1% low of 105 and a 0.1% result of 48. Overwatch is one of those games that fares well on most hardware from within the last few years, so it's no surprise seeing these 7-year-old cards making light work of this fun multiplayer title. Fallout 4, also at 1080p with the lowest settings, achieved 60 frames per second. Fallout 4 is one of those games where the frame rate can vary depending on your location in-game, and these results were taken out in the wasteland, where you'll undoubtedly spend most of your time exploring the post-apocalyptic world. Speaking of Fallout, the original classic game is free on Steam at the time of this video, and should be until the end of the day, unless you're watching this after the 30th of September. Borderlands 2 at 1080p with the very high settings saw a nice average of 76, and don't be put off by those percentiles because it seems as though they may have been caused by loading screens amidst the buttery smooth gameplay. Borderlands 2 is a great game that I really haven't played enough of, and it seems like a lot of fun. As for the notoriously unoptimised PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, the results you're about to see feature 1080p and 720p averages, with the 720p scores being the ones contained within brackets. SLI didn't work either here, which is a shame, but the single card saw a seemingly playable result of 31, though the 1% and 0.1% lows would likely render this somewhat unplayable, with 1080p being a total no-go. Finally, it's CSGO. This time with the highest settings at Full HD. With an average of 203, even the most frequent players should have an enjoyable experience here, and should you want to turn things down a bit, you should expect even more frames, including improvements on those percentile stats. Now, I'll admit right off the bat that at the time a lot of review sites concluded the GTX 465 traded blows with the 5830 from AMD, which could actually be found for under $200 when it was on sale, making that the one to buy. However, these days The GTX 460 would probably also be the better option because not only is it a little more powerful, but it's more common as well, along with the 470 and 480, which are even closer in price these days. So overall, I don't think the cards held up too badly. Sure, there are definitely better options as well as better used options available, but there's something about the idea of SLIing old cards and spending little money to do so that really is quite exciting. So if you can find old graphics cards based on this architecture, or even if you can find the AMD Radeon alternative for Crossfire, you should have no problem with running a few modern titles with respectable settings and frame rates. Thank you for watching, guys. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Rate this video with a like or a dislike, of course, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.